Mightyreacts, back with the reacts. On today's video, we are reacting to What Did Megalodon Actually Look Like by Benji Thomas. So enough of the talking, let's react!
Sharks are fascinating creatures. These magnificent animals capture the imagination of people around the world, and play crucial roles in the intricate underwater food webs that sustain life on our planet. Throughout their long evolutionary history, this ancient lineage has given rise to numerous awe-inspiring predators, and one of the most impressive and infamous of these deadly fish is Megalodon. Megalodon, scientifically known as Otodus megalodon, is a very interesting prehistoric animal. It's so well known by people. I mean, there's even a major book and film franchise named after this creature, and yet we don't actually have a completely 100% certain idea of what this shark looked like. That's because Megalodon, like all sharks, had a cartilaginous skeleton, rather than one made of bone like ours. Cartilage is a lot less durable than bone when it comes to being preserved for long periods of time, and so sharks' bodies only rarely fossilize. They can, of course, still fossilize given the right conditions, but it's not as likely. This means that currently the only fossilized remains of Megalodon.
Bro, those fucking teeth are really big. Imagine get bit by those fucking sharks.
Commonly accessible to
Legs
science
off
are the teeth, and more rarely, the backbones of these animals. Since the teeth were mineralized and therefore preserved well, and the backbones were made of very dense cartilage that could sometimes be preserved. Due to these limited data points, building up an idea of what Megalodon looked like has been challenging, and although many reconstructions have made it look essentially just like a scaled up great white shark, this is probably not accurate to its true life appearance. Back in Shark Week 2019, I made a video exploring some possible ideas about what the big fishy of death could really have looked like. But since then, there has actually been a lot of interesting research that has cast new light onto the real appearance of Megalodon. Many of these studies I've covered in other videos, mostly in my 7 Days of Science show. But I thought that now would be a good time to bring all this research together and provide an updated look at Megalodon. So what did Megalodon actually look like according to the latest science? Previously, many estimates of the murder guppy's size and anatomy had been based on measurements of their fossil teeth and comparisons with living great whites. This was largely the result of now outdated ideas about how Megalodon should be classified, since for a long time, white sharks were thought to be their...
Bro, even the great white shark is fucking big, bro. I cannot even imagine how big the fucking Megalodon will be. Damn, bro.
Closest living relatives, or even their direct descendants, because of how similar the shapes of their teeth were, and therefore they were generally considered to be the best.
Bruh, those teeth is fucking big as my hand, bro. God damn.
Best ecological analogues to Megalodon alive today, both being apex marine predators. However, closer examinations of their tooth anatomy later revealed that Megalodon was actually a member of an entirely separate family from the great white, an extinct group called Otodontidae. Otodontidae is still a member of the Lamniformes order though, the same order that includes the great white, as well as makos, sand tigers, basking sharks, threshers, goblin sharks, and others. One of the first very detailed attempts to...
But wait a second, I don't really understand how they can say they don't know how actually big the Megalodon is, but how the fuck do you know a Megalodon exists then? How did y'all come about this fucking Megalodon?
Reconstruct Megalodon's body proportions was published in 2020. Researchers employed an interesting two-dimensional modeling technique based on the anatomy of some of these other related living shark species. They deduced that they could infer the possible sizes of Megalodon's head, body, tail, and fins by taking measurements of certain other lamniform sharks that were considered to have similar ecologies and physiologies to Megalodon, based on their tooth shapes and metabolic rates. Specifically, they used the short and long fin makos, the salmon shark, and the porbeagle in addition to the great white, all of which are big, fast-swimming macropredators. The logic behind this was that they were not simply using the great white as the only reference point. and were looking at multiple shark species within the lamniforms, and that there was enough of a correlation between the anatomies of these sharks at different body sizes that they could be used to infer the body dimensions of Megalodon. The researchers therefore went about measuring certain landmarks of the bodies in all these living species, and produced their estimation of the true overall body shape of Megalodon. This version of the enormous shark looked, predictably, a lot like a very big generalized lamniform, although it's also pretty stocky and has some specific unique bits of anatomy. The head, according to the study, would have been very large and robust, considering how the heads of the larger living analogues tended to increase in robusticity. They also hypothesized that the snout of Megalodon would have been a bit more curved than in the great white, as its massive jaws would have needed proportionally larger muscles to support them, and so the body would not have tapered off to the snout as sharply as in white sharks. They also said that, since all their living analogues had the same overall tail shape and similarly upwardly directed tail fins, Megalodon would have had this type of tail anatomy too. The shape of the fin on the back, called the dorsal fin, was additionally suggested to have been proportionally tall and narrow, as the larger living lamniforms again seemed to have fins shaped this way, rather than being shorter and more rounded. According to the scientists who worked on this analysis, this kind of body shape appeared to have made the monster shark very well adapted for engaging in bursts of very fast swimming speeds, as well as endurance swimming. In fact, several of the same researchers built upon these conclusions in another paper published in 2022, claiming that Megalodon was a transoceanic superpredator. They said it was a faster cruiser than any living shark, and would have been
Bro, you would have thought, actually, any type of big fish in the water is still fast. But bro, imagine fucking Megalodon behind you, and you think you can swim away, bro. It's eating you, swallowing you.
capable of crossing entire oceans in its search for food. This study produced a three-dimensional model of Megalodon, based on a particularly well-preserved series of vertebrae from the giant shark, and used this model to infer how fast it could have swum and how it may have hunted. These vertebrae were discovered in Belgium and all appear to have come from a single Megalodon.
Bro, but I still don't get the fucking scientists, whatever, how the fuck they can come up with all of those things, how fast they swim or whatever, how big they actually are. Bro, to tell you the truth, sometimes I really don't believe in scientists, bro. Really, bro, actually.
141 of these backbones have been discovered, meaning that almost all of the vertebrae in this individual are represented by these fossils. Hence, it's one of the best specimens we currently have of this shark's body in terms of completeness. Paleontologists therefore created 3D scans of all these vertebrae, and combined their digital models with digital scans of an associated tooth series found in the US. They also digitally scanned and scaled up a modern great white shark's skull to represent the head of Megalodon in their model. To complete their 3D digital model, they added in flesh and soft tissues around the skull and backbones, utilizing a full body scan from a great white, and then changed the proportions of certain parts of the body using the shapes they'd established in their 2D reconstruction. And so, another reconstruction of Megalodon's body shape was created.
Bro, so basically they just use the bones of the fucking great white shark and transform it into a Megalodon. How the fuck? Bro, they don't even have bones or nothing about the Megalodon. Not even teeth, tooth. And now, bro, I don't understand this fucking science.
And this time it was three-dimensional, giving us a more complete look at this vision of the stocky prehistoric hunter. The proportions of this model are pretty much consistent with the prior reconstruction, giving Megalodon the appearance of a very large and robust lamniform, with a tall pointed dorsal fin, quite forwardly directed tail fin, and a massive head with enormous jaw muscles. This study also calculated that a Megalodon with such proportions, and scaled to the length of the Belgian vertebral series, would have measured 15.9 meters in length, or over 52 feet, and had a body mass of 61,560 kilograms. That's nearly 68 US tons, and is significantly greater than previous body mass estimates for Megalodon specimens of this size had come to. So this was one stocky old shark. This enormous body mass estimate led the researchers to conclude that such a giant, hefty megalodon would have required almost 100,000 kilocalories per day, which is around 20 times greater than what an adult great white shark requires, though of course they aren't guaranteed a meal every day. The energetic demands of a megalodon of this size could therefore have been satisfied by consuming the equivalent of around 21 kilograms of whale blubber per day, just over 17 kilograms of shark's livers daily, or around 32 kilograms of shark muscle, all of which are very calorific. So, as long as it was consuming things such as blubbery, fairly sizable whales every few days or weeks, a megalodon individual with this kind of body mass could sustain itself. They also then used these inferences, along with calculations of the cruising speed of a megalodon with this body shape, to discuss the shark's movement capabilities. According to their model, this shark was a very fast cruiser, with an absolute cruising speed significantly greater than any other living shark, at about 3.1 miles per hour, or 5 kilometers per hour. This would have been its average speed though, and they did not calculate its possible maximum speed. They suggest that this rapid cruising rate would have allowed the megashark to more frequently encounter the prey it required to sustain itself, and hypothesize that it would have been entirely capable of crossing oceans, considering that great whites today have been known to cross the Indian Ocean. So here we had a vision of Megalodon as a stocky-bodied, ocean-traversing shark with an absolutely giant body mass, truly a predator to be feared. However, not all scientists agreed with these body proportions for the Meg. In 2024, a very
Bro, I'm not even a scientist. I'm not agreeing at all with none of these what these scientists are doing, because bro, how the fuck they gonna use a great white shark body, bones and things to scan or make a fucking megalodon? Bro, did they really saw Megalodon back in the days or something, or they are just making it up?
Interesting new study emerged that radically changed the appearance of Megalodon, arguing that this enormous shark was not particularly stocky, but instead could have been much more elongate and slender than had been previously assumed, almost looking like a terrifyingly huge lemon shark. Not only that, but because the shark was found to have these different proportions, the researchers upped the length estimates for the murder guppy as well. This other team of paleontologists used several lines of evidence to challenge the previous stocky view of Megalodon. First, they noted that although in the time since the last paper was published, it had been confirmed based on geochemical data that the extinct shark indeed had an elevated metabolic rate, it was also discovered that some other living sharks previously thought to be quite sluggish actually had similarly high metabolic rates. These included the basking shark and the small-toothed sand tiger shark. So the logic used by the previous studies was questioned. This is because one of their reasons for why Megalodon would have resembled their selected species was due to them having similar metabolic rates. Therefore, it was assumed that a shark with such a metabolism would have a body shape generally like this. But clearly, basking sharks don't—
Bro, what the fuck? What kind of shark is this, bro? I never saw that or seen that.
Much resemble great whites. This other team of researchers then returned to the vertebral column fossil from Belgium and noted something rather strange about what scientists had said about this specimen in the past. When the scientists on that 2022 study had measured the length of this column, they found that the whole series, lined up from beginning to end and accounting for the few missing bones, was 11.1 meters or 36.4 feet. However, an older study from 1996 that had also looked at this vertebral column had performed a length estimate for this individual by measuring the maximum width of the vertebrae and then comparing them to the lengths of teeth in a sample of living white sharks. According to this estimate, which was scaling up from great whites, the individual must have measured 9.2 meters or
Bro, this shark went to war, bro. Look at this body, bro. Look at this shark body, bro. This shark went to war, bro.
30.2 feet in total length, including the head and the tail. As you've probably realized, there's something a bit off about that. The length estimation technique that used the great white as a basis for calculating Megalodon body length massively underestimated the actual length of this individual, which we know was longer than 9.2 meters because the vertebral column alone was 11.1 meters. That could only mean one thing. Megalodon did not have body proportions like a great white shark. It must have been proportionally longer. This study also went into a detailed criticism of the methods used to create the 3D model, since the entire 3D reconstruction of Megalodon as this basically extra bulky great white is incredibly questionable, because their whole method of reconstructing the head was by slapping on a scaled up great white skull, and
That's
all the
why I'm
soft tissues
telling
of the
y'all.
model were again just from a great white digital scan. So no wonder it ended up looking like a big, robust great white shark when it was mostly made from a great white shark, but with some slightly altered fin shapes.
Bro, that's why the whole time I didn't trust the scientists, bro. How the fuck can you use a great white shark to
The
measure
proportionally
a
long
fucking
vertebral
megalodon?
column compared to a great white was a very intriguing and important discovery for our understanding of Megalodon's true appearance though. In 2025, the same group of researchers who published the 2024 paper built further on this realization, taking measurements from the skulls and vertebrae of 165 species of living and extinct sharks to work out a relationship between the trunk length, head length, and tail fin length in all these different examples. Once they had these general proportions of the different body parts of all these different sharks, they were then able to make some estimates for Megalodon's total body length. Since they had a value for the trunk length of one Megalodon individual, the 11 meters of the Belgian vertebral column, they were then able to use the average proportions gathered from their diverse array of other shark samples to infer some reasonable proportions for the head and tail of Megalodon. The logic behind this was that because the lamniform shark median head and tail proportions were pretty consistent with the larger dataset of all shark proportions, these could serve as reasonable conservative proxies for Megalodon's head and tail proportions. These median values did exclude some extreme lamniforms though, such as the goblin shark with its incredibly long head, and the thresher sharks with their very long tails, since there's no evidence to currently suggest that Megalodon would have had abnormally elongate heads or tails. So, using these proportions as proxies, the Belgian individual is estimated to have had a skull length of about 1.8 meters and a tail length of around 3.6 meters, meaning the total body length for this particular Megalodon is 16.4 meters, or 53.8 feet.
Actually,
based on this established relationship between vertebra size and total body length, they then consider an example of an absolutely massive vertebra unearthed in Denmark that would have come from an even larger individual, and find that this particular Megalodon could have reached a total length of 24.3 meters, about 70.
bro, that's fucking big, bro. But how the fuck the scientists know that if y'all couldn't even measure the body properly? Hey, bro, anyways.
9.7 feet. Therefore, this longer, more slender version of Megalodon indicates that the monster shark's size has likely been significantly underestimated in the past, and it was probably far longer than many recent estimates that were generally ranging from 15 to 20 meters. The researchers do note, however, that these length estimates, and indeed the reconstructed relative proportions of the head and tail, are somewhat arbitrary, as they selected the middle values of their large sample of sharks to represent the safest assumption for Megalodon. But without actual direct evidence, it is still an assumption. However, for the moment, it's the logical and most evidence-led assumption to make. So, with these established body part proportions, just how slender was Megalodon exactly? Well, one of the analyses undertaken in the study found that Megalodon clustered close to the living lemon sharks in terms of its body proportions, and so the team looked into whether the big fishy of death really may have looked a bit like a scaled up lemon shark. They examined how whales of different sizes perform hydrodynamically with different body shapes, and then artificially scaled up a lemon shark, a great white, and a porbeagle to the size of Megalodon to see how efficiently each of their body shapes would allow the animals to swim at larger dimensions. Plotting these performances on a graph alongside the whale data, they found that giant great whites and porbeagles would end up in the region defined as imposing hydrodynamic disadvantages on the animals.
But I don't understand nothing about that. What he's talking about right now.
Meaning these stocky body shapes at Megalodon's size would increase the amount of drag acting on the shark, and so it would cost more energy to swim. On the other hand, a scaled-up lemon shark followed the trend of larger whales, meaning a giant lemon shark would still have been hydrodynamically efficient. So that's some pretty good evidence that a lemon shark-like body plan makes a lot more sense for Megalodon than a scaled-up great white body does. Also indicated on this graph is where the previous 2D and 3D reconstructions of the bulky Megalodon would fall, labelled C20 and C22 respectively. And as you can see, they're in the disadvantages zone, so the stocky Megalodon would not have been an energy efficient swimmer. As a result of the analyses in this 2025 paper, the authors present a tentative reconstruction of the megashark's body shape, showing it as a silhouette with the Belgian vertebral column superimposed. The precise shapes of the fins are still unknown, but a Megalodon with these body proportions would certainly have been a better and more efficient swimmer than the shark portrayed in the other reconstructions. They also recalculate the mass of the Belgian individual at about 30 tons, rather than the 61.5 tons calculated for the robust Megalodon. Based on a previous study some of the same scientists had undertaken in 2023, they also found that Megalodon was probably not a fast cruiser like the other bulky body forms suggested. Fossilized.
That's what I thought too. I thought because the whales cannot swim that fast, I think. But now they're saying, in the scientists saying that this Megalodon were fucking fast. So what is it now? Is he fast? Is he slow? If the Megalodon ever exists or not, or they still exist, I don't know, bruh.
Examples of Megalodon's scales were analysed, which were discovered preserved in the rock matrix around an associated series of Megalodon teeth from Japan. The anatomy of these tiny scales embedded in shark skin, called placoid scales, is related to the cruising speed of the shark species they are found on, since they also have a role in reducing hydrodynamic drag on the shark. As it turns out, the anatomy of the Megalodon placoid scales revealed that the shark was not a speedy cruiser, but instead was a relatively slow swimming shark, slower than even living great whites. So Megalodon was likely a generally slow swimmer that would then have engaged in sudden bursts of speed while hunting, though exactly how fast it could get at its maximum is still entirely speculative, even at the slowest.
But bro, tell you the truth, all those Megalodon films that I watch, I saw that they was pretty fast though. So who's telling the truth, who's not, bruh?
Swimming speeds though, Megalodon was clearly capable of long-distance swimming out into open oceans, considering that Megalodon teeth have been found very far out to sea. The idea that Megalodon resembled a giant lemon shark is a very interesting new concept for this fascinating animal's appearance. However, as the authors of the 2025 study state themselves, this has to be treated as a working hypothesis, as there are still many aspects about this titanic fish that we still just don't know, due to the limited fossil record we're working with. There's no doubt that no matter what Megalodon actually looked like, it still would have been an awesome predator. We know it was feeding on whales and all sorts of other prehistoric marine mammals that were unlucky enough to share the oceans with it, and this was an apex predator the likes of which the world has never seen before or since. Hopefully, future fossil discoveries will only continue to improve our knowledge of this remarkable animal, and we can learn more about how this creature lived, how it impacted the marine food webs of the past, and gain a better understanding of why it disappeared from our planet's oceans.
I want to know that
I really
too.
hope you enjoyed this updated exploration of Megalodon's appearance. It's been an eventful last few years in terms of research into this particular aspect of Megalodon biology, so it was fun to make this recap of all the developments so far. I'm sure there'll inevitably be some more research on what Megalodon may have looked like, hopefully with some more fossil material to describe. And you can be sure that we'll keep you up to date on all the latest Megalodon news over on our weekly science news channel 7 Days of Science, where I and my co-presenters report on all the recent paleontological developments.
I'm gonna make sure to check those videos out, so yay.
Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to stay in the loop. I also hope you enjoyed this Shark Week 2025 special. I know we usually produce a few videos for Shark Week each year, but this has been such a busy time for me that I wasn't able to create a whole week.
So yes guys, what do y'all think about that, bro? Do y'all think the Megalodon ever exists, or they still exist, or no? But bro, I really don't understand how the scientists can do all of that to scan the body with a bone from a great white shark, or know how actually big they are and how fast they swim or how slow they swim. I don't know how they do that, but I want to know. But hey, if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. See you guys on the next reaction. Peace.